Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Aiden. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you here, Kevin. You've had a pretty extensive leadership career. You were VP of marketing at Buffer, head of marketing at Poly, and now you're head of marketing at Oyster. So you've been head of marketing pretty much in the last few companies that you've been at. If we were to rewind and maybe talk about when you first started leading teams, I assume that was also at Buffer, or maybe
It
it was
was,
before. Yeah,
yeah,
and
Buffer.
so. Tell me about that experience. Like, what were some of the early mistakes that you maybe made when you were first starting to lead teams?
Oh, probably so many. I think anyone who's starting fresh like I was, like I didn't know anything about leading teams. Um, let's see some of the mistakes that I made. So I think the biggest one that I can think of is I tended to have a very specific idea of how the team should be. And so what this might look like in practice is, there's a teammate that I have who has a certain role, and I need them to do this certain job. And um, as like my very first time managing in that situation, I think I was too hard-headed about what that needed to look like. And I think what I didn't incorporate was, what does that person want? What are their strengths in this case? Like, am I asking them to do something that's outside of um, their skill set, or outside of their experience, or outside of the things that they're passionate about? Um, the one case I can think of, like it was headed in a very um, precarious direction because I was a bit too stubborn in wanting to shape the team how I thought best, without bringing in these other factors of, what is the teammate best at? What are they skilled at? What are they passionate about? Um, I think that was a tough lesson to learn. It ended up working out just great. And the teammate and I chatted about it, and we were able to find a really good compromise and middle ground to move forward with. But that was a scary situation at first because I didn't know a way out of it, other than kind of talking it through, which is kind of how we solved that one. So that was one big one. I think the other ones, sometimes they come down to feedback, and my my feedback style, for better or worse, I think is that sometimes you'll receive feedback from me without knowing that you've received feedback. And so the way that I think about it is, you can either be intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated. And I try to create environments where intrinsic motivation is present. And it's almost like a psychological trick of, I'll tell you something, but you're the one who goes and decides, like makes the decision on that. And so where that comes into some difficulties is, if someone doesn't speak that language or isn't picking up on the cues I might be dropping. So, there was a situation where we're running this potentially big and impactful campaign, and I get the sense that things might be going a bit sideways with it, or like the quality bars are where we needed it to be. And rather than just tell the person that directly, I kind of hinted at it and tried to steer them in the direction to maybe reconsider this or reconsider that. And so, because I wasn't as upfront and clear on that, the person didn't get the message, and the campaign went live, and it did fine, but I don't think it quite reached its full potential. And so I found that there needs to be a balance there. Like, it's okay to lead people toward these outcomes, but I think there's other times, and person to person, where I need to be a bit more direct in the way that I communicate some of those things.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Let me dig into this. You talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and maybe you could tell us more about like how you said you set up a system so people are more intrinsically motivated.
Yeah, and maybe a system's being too generous with it. Um, I think it's just more of my approach to feedback. And so, I have manager tools. We have a one-to-one doc that I share feedback in. We have formal reviews, and all those pieces are in place. I think what it comes down to for me is, when I give feedback, I typically give it from um, either an area of strength that I see. And so I will tell someone what I think they're doing great at in order to encourage more of that behavior. What I think that does is it shows the things that are valued in my mind, shows the things that are valued within our team, and hopefully they end up doing more and more of that great work. Um, the other side of it is that I will bring an approach of like question asking to a situation. And so rather than tell someone what I think how I think things should be, I will ask them what their take on it is. And typically I have found that they end up coming to the same conclusions that I was going to share with them regardless. And so a question of it might be, how did you think this campaign went? When probably the answer is going to be the way that I think it has gone. And rather than me just tell them that, they have to say, oh, my manager is telling me something I already know. Like, I give them the chance to vocalize that and share with me. And I think that has proved to be somewhat empowering for teammates. I think it allows them to feel like I trust them to assess situations appropriately. And if we're off for any reason, like, I can have the opportunity to come in and say, I can see how you arrived there. Here's kind of where I'm coming from and what I've noticed. And so it does end up kind of feeling to the teammate like they're the ones driving that growth process, and I'm just the supporting layer to help them get there.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I've heard it is harder. It is something that is harder to do. So, for example, you see a problem, and rather than just going out and saying what the problem is or how to fix it or make it better, just using questions in that way, I think that's a really good way to do it. I did want to talk to you or dig more into the first point that you made. And so you said that, like, sometimes when coming into a role, you thought that a role should be a certain way or someone should do a certain thing, but then you found later on that you should really take into account the person's strengths or weaknesses or what kind of things that they do want to work on. So, very tactically speaking, what if there is something that just needs to be done and there is something that just needs to happen? And what if you don't have, an infinitely large team that you could just redirect things to other places? Like, practically speaking, how does that all play out?
Yeah, there's a couple different lenses that I would take to that. The first is that if it's something that no one has the skill set in, no one really wants to do, I will do it, which is maybe not the best answer.
Yeah, I was going
But
to ask you about that. Does that mean that you just end up doing a lot of things?
I mean, sometimes, yes. I think one of the lessons that I've learned, I think you might have heard this, that like bad stuff rolls downhill because no one wants to take it on. So the person at the bottom ends up with all this stuff. I think a company with great managers, that kind of stuff rolls uphill. And so all the things that no one wants to take on, the manager takes that on and kind of leads by example there. And so I do find myself doing that work often, which is fine. I think that's part of my management philosophy. So that's one answer to that question. I think the other lens that I would take to it is, if it fits within someone's scope of responsibilities, I would communicate that this is kind of an expectation for them to cover this. And I recognize it's not the easiest thing or their most favorite thing, but it needs to be done. Typically then the conversation pivots to what kind of resources can we give you to support you in this? Is it something we can outsource and you can manage, a contractor in that sense? Is it something we can solve with the tool? Is it something we can just automate or make easier for you? So that's one piece. I think the other angle then is, here's something that no one really owns on the team but needs to get done. The way that I might phrase that is to my team is like, here's an opportunity for you to show leadership in a way of picking up something that isn't in your core area, something that is important to the team, and treat it as like a positive rather than treat it as, oh, here's something else to add to my list. And typically I've found that people who are at the point where they're interested in like that next career step, they're always eager for those types of opportunities to expand their influence and to grow and to develop. And so framing it in that way tends to lead to some good outcomes there. So I can think of, like, at Oyster, for instance, we have all these articles to update in Zendesk because we switched from Intercom to Zendesk. It's like this help center platform. And it doesn't really fall into anyone's purview to do that. Like, it's just work that needs to be done. So the opportunity then at Oyster is, here are 50 articles that need updated. Who wants to help with this? And I can take that then to the people who report to me and say, here's an opportunity to show some leadership or to show some collaboration and teamwork and jump in. I need to lead by example. I would take on a few of those articles as well, just to show, like, we're not special just because we manage people or have a certain title. Like, you got to do the work that needs to be done. So I think that kind of different framing has often helped in those situations.
Yeah, I really like it in terms of, phrasing it as an opportunity, but also showing just the leadership traits. And you're absolutely right that if you put it out there, people will rise to the occasion. So on that note, one of the things that we have you saying is that if your teammates feel like they're significant to your team, then they will thrive. What does that mean for people to feel that they are significant to your team?
It's one of my favorite quotes. Not that I said it, the quote in general. Like I think I stole it from someone. It's like that idea of significance. Um, it comes out of the parenting world, which I'm I'm not ashamed to admit a lot of my management style comes from parenting, which is maybe a strange thing to admit, but I think there's a lot of beauty in um, some of the parenting philosophies out there that translates really well to work situations and business. And so in our family, significance and belonging are two of the most important things that we can do. And so as you translate that into the work environment, significance along with belonging, like you want your team to feel like if they did not show up to work or if they were not part of this team, they would be missed. Like they are not just a cog in the machine, they are a meaningful part of your organization. And some of the ways to do that, we have this philosophy at Oyster of individual contributors are kind of viewed equally as people managers. Like we want there to be, like leadership can happen from either modality, opportunity happens in either way. And so when you think about your significance on a team, like do you have equal access to opportunities, to impact, to leadership? And so, yes, that's like philosophically true. You can just say that that's the case, but then I think you have to back that up by actually showing it. So, for example, when we do our OKR setting, we will have marketing team OKRs that individual people on the team will own. And those individual owners can be truly anyone on the team, like anyone who wants to raise their hand and say, I accept this responsibility. I want to take this on. We have these what we call lightning strike moments that happen every couple quarters or so, which is we do these kind of major activities that are on the marketing calendar that are cross-functional and collaborative, and we need someone to own those projects, and they're really significant for the company. And rather than say, this falls into our brand section, or this falls into our amplification section, or this falls under this person, we just say, who wants to lead this? Who wants to arrange this and manage it for us, and let someone raise their hand there? And so I think, yes, it's great to say significance and belonging are important, and to say like these are the ways that these are the things we believe, but I think it's just as important to back that up with like some mechanics of how you incorporate that into the team too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So even if it's a say more junior member of the team, you still allow them to take on the ownership for that key result, for example, and so they might orchestrate or be the ones who do a lot of following up, and that can give them a sense of ownership. So that's really interesting. And so how do you then reinforce that, or how do you then through encouragement or public appreciation continue to hammer that point?
Yeah, I think those points are great on encouragement, public appreciation. I think recognizing that in career conversations, and as you're progressing, like making sure that you're capturing those moments. One of the things that I would like to be a lot better at that I'm not good at is uh, documenting wins for each teammate within the team. Like we have win documents for the folks that I work with, but I always forget to add stuff to them. So that's that's maybe a takeaway for me from this chat is like that's a good reminder. That is important, like to have these things objective, so you can look back objectively and say these are all the great things that I've done over the last month, quarter, etc. So that remembrance is important. I think the recognition is important as well. It's recognition not just that you did this thing, but the way that you did the thing, I think is important to consider. And so rather than, let's say someone, we had a key result this quarter of someone led it, that was doubling our traffic and impressions quarter over quarter. And so rather than the celebration being, look, we doubled impressions quarter over quarter, it's more like, yes, we did this thanks to your great effort in seeing this project through to completion, and your thoughtfulness in putting together a strategy that makes this this progress possible for us. And so being specific in the praise, I think, is just as important as the praise itself, because it shows someone that, oh, they're noticing all the work and the specific things that I'm putting into it. So I think that's probably the slightly different spin we take on recognition that I think makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And so for managers out there, I mean, we've all heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, what takeaway would you want? Would you advise all other leaders to take from Maslow?
Yeah, I think a lot about safety when I think about the, the hierarchy of needs. And oftentimes safety is maybe not the number one consideration when you're managing people. It's maybe just a given. But I think in a management context, that psychological safety of creating a space where either one-to-one, your direct report feels like they can come to you with anything, I think that's super important. And I think in a broader context of like the team that you're creating, you want to create that psychological safety so that people feel like they are significant, that they belong, that there's trust and respect there, that they can participate as equals with the folks on their team. So I think, oftentimes as a manager, I'm tempted to jump into some of these bigger topics around career development or growth or team organization and stuff. But I think there's that base foundation layer of creating safety within the team first, and then you kind of build everything from there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so if there is that safety, then people will obviously have more trust. They'll try more things. They'll be willing to, I guess, put themselves out there to own one of those key results. And if you encourage them when they do that, then I can see how this can be a virtuous loop. So that is awesome. So in terms of culture, one of the things that I know that you have described your previous workplace, Buffer, as, you described their culture there as a tentpole. I just thought that that was a very interesting word to use. And I'm curious if you could tell us more about what that means.
Yeah, I probably used it like interchangeably in multiple contexts. So I think in one context, tentpole is almost like a marketing angle for us. Like we have at Buffer, we were known for certain things, known for social media expertise, but also known for the type of culture that we created, known for things like transparency. And so it's a tentpole of the brand in one way. And so that's one way that we think about it. Um, the other angle, more from a management perspective, I think of it as a tentpole, just from the perspective that we care a lot about it in everything that we do, in the way that we hire, in the way that we communicate with each other, in the way that we interact together. It's kind of an unmistakable part of our team, and I think it feels more and more like a tentpole in the way that we had operationalized it to the degree that everyone knew our values, everyone could see a positive value contribution. It's very evident. And if you were to take that, I think the word tentpole resonates in that sense, because if you take that away from our team, everything just kind of collapses. And so that's kind of the framing that we had for it. And the way that it kind of manifested within our team is some of the rituals and behaviors that we really incorporated on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. So when you say tentpole, it's almost like it's a pillar. So everything kind of rests on it. And so was this when it comes to culture? So do you refer to it mostly as like a tentpole internally to continue to get people to function the way that they do, or is it also about just how it's externally viewed to the rest of the world?
Yeah, I can see the case for both. I think for us, it was more of an internal thing. And so we thought of tent poles as, there's so many different things you can say are important to you within a company and within the marketing strategy. And so one way to focus that is to identify 2 to 3 to 4 tent poles and say, these are the things that really matter to us. And so that was probably the most effective use of that terminology, just to say like, this is what we're saying yes to, and then everything else is great, but not the thing that we're known for.
Yeah, that focus certainly goes, a long way, and probably goes also a long way in decision making. Which brings me to our next topic. Turns out that you are also a fan of Principles by Ray Dalio. I really enjoyed the book. Love pretty much
Awesome.
mostly everything that Ray produces. And he has another book that's coming out, which is, I guess, like a bunch of things that he's recently posted on LinkedIn. And it's going to make its way into a full book format, which I'm looking forward to. But um, let's talk about decision making and strategic thinking. What was your biggest takeaway from that book and how it influenced your decision making?
Yeah, I think I loved the approach to having principles for decision making. Like I always thought of decision making as it's just a skill that you have. I didn't think it was anything you could have a perspective on necessarily or an opinion on. And so that book really opened my eyes to, oh, there are ways in which we operate that are unique to us individually. There are things that matter to us. Like that was obvious. I probably should have known that going into it. But kind of crystallizing those things into principles and recognizing that these are true, these can be true in every decision that you make was really powerful. Sometimes I would think I have this big decision to make. It's time for me to just start thinking about what's best to do rather than relying on all these like tropes and mechanisms and things that I've used to make successful decisions in the past. I feel like every decision before reading this book, every decision was a total blank slate. I was just starting over every time. And I think what this book helped me realize was, oh no, I can bring a toolbox into every decision and feel a bit more capable and confident from the start rather than have to figure out everything all over again each time a decision comes up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is there an example that you can think of, whether it's like work or personal, where you had to almost remember principles that you had used in previous decisions and like how that kind of guided you to, I guess, not start from scratch?
Yeah, I hope I wish I had more examples than I do, just because I feel like it's more often the case that I forget to bring those principles to decisions. Probably the one that stands out for me, some of the principles that I use for decision making are around family. Some of them are around optimizing for the things that matter to me, which is kindness, which is giving back. And so when I'm presented with an opportunity, for instance, as you mentioned, I've had a chance to be a head of marketing in a couple of different spots. When it came time to leave those spots and go somewhere new, those were major decisions for me. And the way that I went about those decisions, I was able to apply a framework of, I believe that I need to make decisions in order to optimize for the type of person that I am when I'm at home with my family. And so, in choosing to go from Buffer to Poly, that was one of the considerations. And choosing to go from Poly to Oyster, that was one of the considerations. I think the other aspect of I want to make decisions that allow me to give back in some way to the people who have helped me get to where I am. I think that was really important, especially in the decision to leave from Poly to Oyster, just because I felt like the purpose and mission of Oyster was really aligned with the type of work I wanted to do and the type of person I wanted to be, just in general. And so, that was really helpful to make what was ultimately like a really difficult and hard decision, knowing that I could rely on that principle gave me a lot of confidence.
Yeah, and I guess like one of the things I remember from the book as well was, I think, did he say pain plus reflection equals progress or something? It was something
That
like
sounds
that.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's very interesting, and like very often you'll make a decision and it won't turn out that great, and just retroactively going back and saying like, well, what can I learn, and like if I actually had, what principle could I have had that would have made that go better. And
Yes.
I'll share a tip that it's very. I had this coach that shared this with me, and I thought it's very interesting because you talked about this. Sometimes I'll have the principles, but then I'll forget to bring them into decision making scenarios, and I totally identify with that. So one thing he suggested to me was write these things down, and then just read them and record yourself reading them, and every now and then like play them back to yourself. And so I have this set that I've created, and so sometimes when I go on a run I will just like like replay that, and then it'll just force me to remember those things so that they don't get forgotten. And I found that it's been pretty helpful. So
Amazing. Good for
yeah.
you. I can't imagine going to those lengths. I feel like I should take a page from your book there. I have it on my list to like write down the principles still. So you're like next level to have taken it all the way there. It's amazing.
Yeah, so it's a combination of that, but it's also, I don't know if you also feel from time to time that you end up relearning some of the same lessons. And so I'm like, I need to stop relearning the same lesson. So how do I keep reminding myself to, invoke this knowledge and just remember it? So I found that to be helpful.
Absolutely. One of the lessons I keep forgetting is just the the danger in saying yes to everything right away. And so one of the principles that I haven't put in practice is to give myself time to make decisions. And so I've started to redo that one where, someone will ask me, do you want to participate in this thing? Rather than say yes right away, I'll wait 2 days and see if I'm still as excited 2 days later about it. And so I think that unfortunately that's cost me some time in the past, but hopefully it'll save me some time moving forward.
Yeah, that's I can totally relate to that as well. Everything sounds so good when you first hear about it. I'm definitely like that as well. So this is really interesting. I love this. I love decision making and talking about it. You also employ other frameworks to help your teams make decisions. So Rasi and Dasi being, some of those frameworks. Is there a kind of like a rule of thumb that you use to figure out what kind of a decision making framework you should put into place within teams or within certain meetings?
Yeah, I think there's, if I were to have anything in mind, it would be that it's like either use a framework or don't use a framework is typically how I find myself deciding. I think whenever possible, I try to go with the lighter weight approach of just not having a framework. And so what that might mean is just choosing someone who is the decider in that case, like a DRI, a directly responsible individual, and just making that clear. And then you kind of reduce the need for having to go through this matrix of decisions. So I think that's probably my the biggest component of it is just thinking strategically around, is this worth us putting together a whole framework for deciding it, or can we go lightweight and just choose someone to make a call? When there is a need for a framework, it's typically in situations that are cross-functional, collaborative, and major projects that last more than a week or so. And I think in those situations, that's when a framework like the RACI or DACI ones really do become a lot more important, where you have to think about all the multiple stakeholders and what role they play within that decision. I think the more stakeholders you have, the more helpful some of these frameworks are. And so for me, I'm actively either trying to reduce stakeholders um, or just to simplify it and say there's this one person making the call. I think the temptation is to add frameworks where they don't need to be. I just think it gives a lot of friction sometimes in that process.
And I love that
Yeah.
phrase that you use, which is, I'm always trying to reduce the number of stakeholders. I mean, there's just a lot of wisdom in hearing you say that. So
Oh, well, thank you. I think it goes back to like trust and respect for me. Like if you're building a team with those foundations, ideally you need fewer stakeholders, or there's fewer people who feel like they need to be stakeholders. Maybe that's a better way of phrasing it. And so if you get those things right, like those foundations of trust and respect, hopefully everything moves a bit faster from there.
yeah, and so if you have less stakeholders, I guess one of the things that you may be really good at is making sure that information is disseminated to all the right places. You use this term called ghost knowledge, and I really like that term. It sounds intriguing. So this, of course, refers to information that is useful information for the organization, but maybe exists in private channels, maybe in like private Slack channels, maybe in your head. And so this is something that every organization really deals with, and I feel like it's even maybe more important in a remote and hybrid world. I'd love to learn about some of the things that you've done. I know that Buffer was remote, or both Oyster um, and also I guess Poly were they also remote organizations too?
Yes, I've been remote for a while now. Yeah, all of three of them
Okay.
happen.
Awesome. So I'm curious to learn about, some of the strategies that you have used to eliminate ghost knowledge.
Yeah, and I should give credit to Sari Azout, who came up with the term ghost knowledge too, because she's fantastic, and it resonated when I saw it. Also, I think it resonated both from the internal side, but also the external side. Like, there's so much that we all know individually that is in our heads or within our orgs that could be helpful to share out as well. So I was fortunate at Buffer. I learned a lot of great stuff about transparency and the value of documentation, knowledge, and all this stuff. And I've tried to bring that to the other places that I've worked. And I think the way that the framing that I have for this is this idea of push and pull, where there's situations where it makes sense to push information out to people and push information to your team. But I think the more scalable solution there is pull, where I can go and find information and pull it into me when I need it. I think if you rely too much on push, you end up with just this fire hose of content information that just slows everything down and makes it kind of stressful to work. And I think when it's available to pull, I think that's a much, much better way to work. And so what that looks like then is, do you have tools for like project management? So we use Asana at Oyster. So I can go into any project that I want and see the status of it, see what tickets are underway, where things might be blocked. I think another way to pull information is having some sort of asynchronous tool that you use to communicate within your team. I tend to think of it as this is my ideal stack, is that Slack is for like chatter, which is like Hangout chat, that like Google Docs or Dropbox Paper, that's going to be more for your asynchronous collaboration, like real-time collaboration within the docs. And then you really need then Notion is the third tool. So that's like your wiki. So it's like your evergreen content articles. And then fourth, and this is the one that most teams either forget or that it comes a bit later in the journey for companies, is that you have some place to share asynchronous updates, asynchronous requests for feedback. And so for us at Buffer, this was a tool called Threads. Before Threads, we used a tool called Discourse. I think WordPress uses one of the WordPress themes called P2. But I think what that does is it enables almost like this inbox view of what's happening at the company. You can, dip in and out of it when you need to and see what else other teams are working on. So you kind of have these different tools for different purposes. I think it's dangerous to have one tool do multiple jobs just because it kind of muddies the water a little bit, but you have one tool doing each of these distinct jobs. Then you know kind of where to go to pull that information back to you. And then maybe you push information on more of like a monthly or weekly cadence in terms of like overall updates to the team.
Got it. So the key is by eliminating or kind of reversing the push motion, turning it into a pull motion, and then on a weekly or monthly basis, then focusing on pushing the most important information to a body of people.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. I did want to also talk to you about Oyster. So you, as a company, are definitely helping with this with the global talent gap. Now that people have learned that remote is possible, obviously at like some of the companies that you've been at, you have long discovered this. But now that people know that they can hire people anywhere, that's one of the things that you help organizations do at Oyster. I'd love to talk about diverse teams and how you, as a company, are helping organizations do a better job at creating those diverse teams.
Yeah, I think diversity has a lot of different flavors to it, and so one of the flavors that we think enables a lot of other flavors to happen is when you think about geographic diversity for your team. So if you're hiring people from around the world, the hope is that you're bringing in a lot of different perspectives to your team, which is one of the great things about diverse teams. And so our software enables that to happen. Like, we enable you to hire from anywhere around the world. I think for us as a company, we are hoping to set the example of what it looks like to be a great distributed team. And so our product enables it from a software perspective. We also try to instill some opinion into the software, some opinion into the different tools and resources that we provide, so that you can understand the benefits of being fully distributed, of being like diverse in that geographic sense. And so we'll share our best practices about how we manage our fully remote distributed team. We also have resources for remote workers to get additional training on how to be a great remote worker in terms of tools and communication style and things like that. And so it's kind of enabling from both different lenses. It's enabling from a software perspective and also from like a tools, resources, marketing perspective.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so let's dig into that a little bit. So you are being opinionated a little bit about how people should, uh, I guess, manage those diverse teams. What about? I'm curious to get your thoughts on what you do for meetings and specifically for your for distributed meetings. I know that at a bunch of companies that you've worked for, people have also been in different time zones. Uh, so, how many of your meetings in general? I assume a lot of them are asynchronous. Um, how do you manage that? How do you decide what meetings should be asynchronous and which ones should not be?
Yeah, we do have a mix. So we have a biweekly marketing stand up, and biweekly is every 2 weeks, not twice a week. So every 2 weeks, we get together synchronously over a 1 hour Zoom. And that is our only team ritual that happens on like that type of cadence. Everything else is asynchronous. And so that includes, we do it the weeks that well, every Monday we do asynchronous stand-ups or catch-ups, which is each team shares a loom on what they were up to over the week before and what they have going on next week. It's like 3 or 4 minutes each. Then we also do all of our planning and strategizing just in Google Docs together. And so that happens whenever the need arises. I've only been at Oyster for about 3 months now, which has been fantastic to get to kind of understand the rhythms of the team. I think one of the things we might put in place is a bit of a ritual around the end of a quarter, start of a quarter, kind of a time to celebrate together, to share learnings, and then to look ahead and plan ahead for the coming quarter. So that might be the other synchronous time that we have. But more and more, we're trying to reduce as much synchronous as possible. And so focus it on that biweekly meeting and then maybe another quarterly meeting just to get everyone together. We are spread across the world today. So there's really not a time that's convenient for us all to be on a Zoom together. And so we have to be intentional about being asynchronous first and then bring in these synchronous moments when we can. And then, of course, record the synchronous moments in case people can't or aren't able to make it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what about one-on-ones?
Oh, one-on-ones. Well, I do a 1 hour one-to-one every week with the people who report to me. And I'm fortunate that everyone has time zone overlap with me today. When I was at Buffer, I had a couple of teammates in Singapore and in Sydney. So I would stay up late to have those one-to-ones with them. I think something else we've tried in the past is kind of alternate week after week, where one person stays up late in their time zone 1 week, the other person the other week. So I think either way works. I think my perspective as a manager, like it's oftentimes there's like one time zone in one region that might be underrepresented and across the rest of the company. And so they are used to just adjusting their schedule to join a company-wide all hands or all these other syncs. So whenever possible, like I as a manager should sacrifice my time so that they have like a normal time to meet with me. Like when are they at their best? And then I can meet them there. So that was kind of my approach for folks who are outside my immediate time zone.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Kevin. From all the answers that you've had to my many questions, it's definitely evident that you take servant leadership to heart. Going on their time zone, staying up late, but also picking up the things that nobody else wants to do and showing leadership first. I think the people on your team are very lucky to have you as a manager.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, and so we have we talked about a lot today. We talked about decision making, culture as a tentpole, ghost knowledge, and even psychology, and we even touched on Maslow. So it's been a very wide ranging discussion, so many takeaways. One thing that we do like to end with is, for all the managers and leaders out there constantly looking to get better at their craft, are there any final tips, tricks, or words of wisdom that you'd like to leave them with?
Oh, I mean, there's so many that get shared on this podcast all the time. I might take a slightly different angle and say, like, I really have benefited from all the parenting knowledge that I picked up over the years. And so if you're looking for like a little secret advantage in the manager space, like maybe check out a parenting book or like talk to some great parents that you know about some of the things they have learned about raising great kids, and maybe some of that could translate into some unique things to try from a management angle.
Okay, I'll bite. What is a great parenting book that I should check out, and subtly use some of those things for managing my team?
Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't be prescriptive about parenting philosophies because I know there's so many out there. The one that has worked best for our family is a book called Positive Discipline. That's where some of the phrasing around belonging and significance come in. It's based on Alfred Adler's psychological perspective, and so that'd be the one that I would highly recommend. It's worked well for us.
I'll have to check it out. And that you are right. That is different, a different angle of advice, but I like it, and I think that it's something that everybody should try. And with that said, Kevan, this has been awesome, and thank you so much for doing it.
Thanks so much, Aidan. Great chatting with you.